Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Sanders, and this is Watch Art Sci, the art and science of watch collection. Today, what I want to do is to take a look at the groups that watches belong to in terms of ownership. The first group I want to look at are the independents. They're sort of on their own to some extent. For example, Audemars Piguet has been around for a very long time, and they've been by the Audemars Piguet family, and so they're independent. Now, another one, Beauvais, called, I believe the new name is Beauvais 1822. They were founded back in I think it was either the late 18th, early 19th century, and they sort of struggled along for a while after their major business was in China. They came back, and then about 20 years ago, a guy named Pascal Raffi decided he was going to make it as the kind of watch company it was years ago, and so he had the money to do it, and he did. So anyway, there's sort of some kind of organizational thing associated with a lot of these companies, but they're not owned by anybody outside of, you might say, their own orbit. Some companies like H. Moser SA, they have something called precision engineering, and they make their movements in their hairsprings and things like that, and they do sell them to other companies. And the same is true with Parmigiani Fleurier as part of the Sandoz Family Foundation, which started Parmigiani as an independent watch company, but then set up a vertical hierarchy to provide them with movements through a company called Vaucher, and making hairsprings and things for them, a company called Atocalpa. So I mean, there's some complexities in all of them. FP Journe, for example, recently sold a certain percentage, if I got 10-20%, something like that, to Chanel. So these are independent, but there's a lot of interdependence that goes on between them to some extent. Okay, now, so these are the ones, very popular ones: Rolex, Tudor. Rolex is one, but they own Tudor, so Tudor's sort of independent. So anyway, so let's take a look at these, and the companies, the ones that are the owning companies. Now, the first one I'm going to look at, by the way, too, you'll see right next to every one of them in parentheses, there's a number, and that's the number of Grand Prix awards they've won. Richemont is one of the largest and has some of the best watches. Vacheron Constantin, Lange & Söhne, Jaeger LeCoultre, Roger Dubuis, IWC, Panerai, on and on and on, Van Cleef & Arpels. Now, this group is, they set something up called Val Fleurier, that they're making movements for companies that don't really do a whole lot with their movements. In other words, they don't see them coming out with new movements a lot. Some, like IWC, still very dependent on Solitas right now. They used to be ETAs. Same with Cartier. But then Cartier and Piaget and even Vacheron Constantin, as well as Baume & Mercier, all have used some aspect of the movements that they make for members of the group. This is sort of an interesting thing to see now. What effect does this have? Well, these groups are primarily interested in making a profit, so sometimes this can affect the creativity of a watch company. Well, we're going to do what we want to, and they don't. On the other hand, they also provide funding for them to do creative things. So there's sort of a two-edged sword to these ownership groups. The third group, or the third group of watches, a company called Swatch. Now, Swatch owns a lot of other, very old names like Blancpain, Breguet, some of the, let's see, Hamilton, Omega. Uh, so, I mean, there's a huge number of them. Recently, they bought Harry Winston, which was they paid over $1 billion for it, which is a jeweler primarily, but they also had watches made for them. They hired some of the top talent and do have their own watches. So the Swatch Group, now on the lower end of the continuum or the spectrum, you have a good solid group of movements by ETA. On the other hand, you also have movements that they can make themselves. For example, Glossuda Original, they make their own movements. And so there are a lot of different kinds of things going on in the Swatch Group. But ever since Swatch cut off the ETA to other watchmakers, they've had to go somewhere else like Sellita and so forth. So this is sort of an interesting group here. You have Blancpain that have their own little movement maker that's from Frederic Piguet from way back when, which was a movement company that actually bought Blancpain, and then the whole thing was taken over by Swatch. And one of the reasons that Swatch, some of these other companies, have been able to take over these companies, isn't that they're sort of this voracious animal. Rather, it's very hard to survive as a watch company making traditional watches that you wind up or automatics. So this is one of the reasons behind it. Now, this next group, Moët, Hennessy, Louis Vuitton SA, it's a French company. You usually refer to it as LVMH. They're like the other ones. Different kinds of companies come under their wing for different reasons. Bulgari, for example, one you probably heard of. Hublot is another one. Tag Heuer and Zenith, very, very well-known names. Other ones like Fred, or here Dior. Dior has some interesting watches, and Chaumet also does too. So it's, even though you haven't heard of them before. Now, there's something that they have called La Fabrique du Temps, and this is a group, this is their movement-making group, but they also have Zenith and Defy Labs, which has a lot of real talent there for making movements. Other ones like Tag Heuer, they'll go outside and they'll use movements by Sellita or ETA and some other companies like that. So you have a really mixed bag, and I think I have a feeling that LVMH, sooner or later, and sort of trying to get everything, why buy somebody else's movements when you have companies like La Fabrique du Temps, Zenith, who have very good record about making movements. Tag Heuer too, I think, but they do, most of the ones they have are not made by Tag Heuer. Bulgari also now is the BVL title of the movements. They also make their own movements. So it's an interesting kind of thing. This is one that sort of one of the smaller groups, but I like them. I think they have some interesting watches in them. Now, the Kering group is another extremely interesting. On the one hand, they have companies like Girard-Perregaux, which is a very old company going way back in Swiss history. But some of the other ones, not too sure about. Bottega Veneta and Quillen. Some of the companies and some of the watches, I don't know how or why they came into Kering Group, or Kering Group decided that they wanted to have them. You'll find a real mix of quartz watches, especially in Quillen. That's on the lower right, the second from the end down there. And on the other hand, you have some like Ulysse Nardin, who do have their own movement making facilities, as does Gerard Perregaux. And so you may find a lot, movements again being made by these established companies that already make their own movements. Now, those are the major groups. Now, there's some other ones. There are a whole lot of other ones. Festina, Frank Mueller, Movado. Movado is a pretty small one. Citizen Group, Seiko Group. Binda Group was one that most people have never heard of before, and the Fossil Group, which is pretty big. Now, the Fossil and Binda and Citizen, I think, too. Some of the ones in Citizen, not so much Citizen. They have a lot of quartz watches. They're not all quartz watches, and I know that because I went out looking for them, and was able to find some that were automatic front quartz. And some like Zodiac. Zodiac is not a real old brand, but one of the older brands, and they also have some interesting watches that came to be part of the Fossil Group, with other ones like Burberry, which is just sort of a fashion watch. So anyhow, so the couple things I think are important and interesting. In the Festina Group, they're headquartered in Barcelona, but most of these groups have something in Switzerland somewhere. They own Soprod, which is a movement maker, a very good one too. And they have this other thing called MHVJ for the manufacturer Horlogerie Vallée de Joux. And what there was a company called Techno Time, and they went bust. And so they bought all of their assets, including their designs and so forth. And so that's another thing that they have. And they own some of the older ones. They had for a while. Festina had, apparently they just let them die, and this was the Leroy, which has and El Leroy, the same company. And I think they just let them die because of some fabulous watches. Frank Mueller, the one that most people have heard of, is Frank Mueller, or it's probably pronounced different than that. But Citizen Group is a Japanese company, and they have La Joux Perret, which makes movements. It's a Swiss group. They had originally been Jacquet. Jacquet got in big trouble and had to go to jail. So the stockholders, I guess, they renamed it to La Joux Perret, and they were eventually bought by Citizen. Seiko Group this is something else. By the way, too, Festina Group, they have 5 million watches a year. I thought, whoa, that's a lot of watches. Seiko Group, in addition to Seiko and Grand Seiko, have also Orient. Orient is a very low-priced watch company, and they sell a whole lot of them. And then on the other end, they have Crador, which is supposed to be their tip-top brand, and along with Grand Seiko. Anyway, these are some things that it's sort of good to know about. If you're looking at a watch and you're thinking about it, and it's one of the things you can check out. Say, well, do they belong to a group? Are they an independent? See what you can find out. I left out a lot of good watch companies. For example, Roger Smith. Roger Smith, well, some of the best in the world. Marco Lang's new company, a lot of them, and I mean, some of the very best. I just didn't have room for everything, and they were independents anyway, and most people know something about them, and they're very expensive. So anyway, I would like to hear of any other groups you know of, or any watches you think I should have put in there, and get your feedback, and let me know if this was of any help at all. And as always, this is an invitation to subscribe if you like. Till next time, this is Bill Sanders for Watch Art Side, the Art and Science of Watch Collection.